you got the best fishermen in the world, and they can't catch 10 pounds of bass.
Bad fishing doesn't make a bad tournament.
And he took a chance and could have cost him the Bassmaster Classic.
When I got locked out, I went back to my room that night and cried.
When I would go to a tournament, my wife had to lie to me because he would raise so much hell.
Kentucky landscape, rich in farming and famous for its beautiful thoroughbreds, plays host each year to the most prestigious horse race in America. In 1987, the 113th running of the Kentucky Derby captured the world's attention as they watched Allie Sheba take the roses before a record crowd.
Allie Sheba with Chris McCarron to the front. Here's the finish. Allie Sheba wins it by 3 parts of a length.
3 months later, record crowds would once again prove that Louisville, Kentucky loved their championship sports.
Having the Classic in Louisville was really a neat experience because the city's heritage with the Kentucky Derby and certainly with the basketball team.
Louisville had a good facility, as I recall, had good crowds, very enthusiastic. People were starting at that time to travel long distances to attend the Classic.
Man, they rolled out the red carpet for us. I'm telling you, that was one of the, even though fishing was really poor, I wouldn't mind going back again, to be quite honest with you.
So I try not to get caught up in that, but it's so pretty. I mean, you know, and where they have all those thoroughbred horses and horse races and the downs.
I don't recall ever being any place that was more friendly than Louisville.
I think it was a great place. You know, Kentucky's got tremendous bass fishing, and it's got a lot of bass fishermen, and those folks showed a lot of enthusiasm for no more fish than were caught.
Louisville the crowds turned out. They were lined up all around the launch area, and it just made you feel good. People would get up before daylight to come out and see fishermen.
At the weigh-ins during the tournaments during the year, we didn't have anybody even close to the number of people that just came to the takeoffs. In Louisville, it was just unbelievable. The streets were lined with people. I don't know where they came from.
I imagine it was different for the people there to see something like that. They'd never had, you know, big-time tournaments there like that. It was pretty rare. They had a lot of participation. I mean, a lot of people come out. I think we had 18,000 people there, something like that. It was pretty good. You know, it's hard to get that many for a basketball game.
The Classic in Louisville was a remarkable event because I think at that time, and maybe still, we probably had larger crowds there than we've had at any Bassmaster Classic.
They had to turn people away the last day, and it was the first time that they had it live.
We had our weigh-ins there in Freedom Hall where the basketball team plays, and it was a very, very loud, excited crowd.
Kentucky basketball and Freedom Hall. It all goes together, and you've seen it on TV and everything, and then you ride through there and you're the celebrity in there. It's a chilling feeling, really.
The year before, in '86, we had been in Chattanooga, Tennessee for the Bassmaster Classic. And we weighed in at the UTC, University of Tennessee, Chattanooga Arena, and they had 10,000 seats. And on the final day on Saturday, we had probably 5,000 people in those 10,000 seats, which was a little disappointing. So when we went to Louisville in 1987, we had to weigh in Freedom Hall Arena, and it has 22,000 seats.
Yeah, we were so concerned in that huge hall in Louisville that it would look empty even if all our regular fans showed up. And so we did drape the upper decks and covered them up with signs and black draping.
When we finally opened the doors on Saturday, there'd been a long line all morning waiting to get into the arena. And we opened the door and there was just a mad rush. And the bottom half, the first 10,000 seats filled up just probably within 30 to 40 minutes.
At the last minute, it was tell them to pull the drapes, and so they did. And I remember looking and seeing people tilting over the curtains and pulling them down just as fast as they could because the crowd was flooding up into those seats.
Before the weigh-in, the entire Freedom Hall Arena of 22,000 seats was totally full. There were people standing. The fire marshals finally locked the doors. Over 3,000 people were turned away that day because the fire marshal would not let them in.
This told us that maybe bass fishing had arrived, the tournament bass fishing. When you can get that many people to show up for a weigh-in, it's pretty phenomenal.
It was such an exciting feeling to see how responsive the people were and how much trouble they go to attend the Classic and to see the weigh-in, see their heroes.
The audience was there to see what could happen, and they saw these guys come in, and of course, Cochran, I remember, they went bonkers and ballistic when he came in a bag full of fish. And
those of us in the press corps who had been to these tournaments back into the 70s and had seen weigh-ins where it was held in the backyard of a hotel, this was pretty amazing, and we're all kind of looking at each other going, you know, this thing's really going nuts. You know, to get this many people to show up for a weigh-in on a body of water where there aren't many fish caught, that was our indication of, we should have known then where we are now.
Up next on Bassmaster Classic Yearbook.
Louisville was the toughest body of water I've ever fished.
Well, it was basically an unsafe place to be running a bass boat.
In 1983, the Ohio River near Cincinnati gave up only 18 pounds 1 ounce as Larry Nixon won the Bassmaster Classic, setting the record for the smallest total catch. BASS traveled to Louisville in 1987 to once again face the mighty Ohio River.
Louisville was probably the toughest body of water I've ever fished. It was even tougher than Cincinnati.
It's an industrial river, basically. It's got a lot of barge traffic. It's got a lot of industry on its banks.
I don't recall encountering that kind of barge traffic, and the kind where it was basically an unsafe place to be running a bass boat.
Your back hasn't lived until you've hit one of those barge wakes going about 60 miles an hour in a bass boat.
River fishing should usually be fairly decent in the summer because you do have current, you got oxygen in the water, and the fish should be active.
But unfortunately, the Ohio River in the summertime is just not the best place in the world to be. There's a lot of barge traffic, and there's not a lot of habitat for largemouth bass.
There's some beautiful creeks on that river where you just think, golly, I should be able to catch fish, and you just fish and fish and fish, and you don't get a bite.
That's the way it was. It was so tough that if you got a bite, you was on to something, you know.
We were limited on pools, and there were a lot of risks to take. You could either go way down south, go through the locks, or you could go way north and go up into the Kentucky River and go through a lock, and there was some good water up there. So you had some options, but they were not good options. There wasn't a whole lot of water in between.
You got the best fishermen in the world, and they can't catch 10 pounds of bass. One guy can't catch 10 pounds of bass. Now, does that not prove how lousy fishing is?
Y'all ever talked to that comment? No, it's been tough all over.
Just could not get a bite, and it was beautiful water. It had milfoil in there. The banks were lined with milfoil. It had a lot of laydowns and stuff. I mean, it looked like you were just going to go out there and just smash them, but it was just terrible.
Well, bad fishing doesn't make a bad tournament. You know, there's a story to be told whether you're catching a lot of fish or a few fish. Somebody's going to win, and somebody's going to take home all the money.
Well, you don't have to have many fish to have a tournament. You have to have some, and somebody's got to catch them. And that was a good horse race.
Ray Scott made a statement many times that we could drop these guys out of an airplane in a mud hole with 5 bass there, and some of these guys are going to catch all 5 of those fish throughout the week, and that's true.
At that time, you know, it wasn't so much how many fish the fishermen caught, it was the challenge, and it was a new area for bass to go.
The ability of the guys that did not catch a fish during the 3 days, and there were some that did that.
It was a tough one in a lot of ways for a lot of the fishermen, but at the same time, that's what it's all about. You know, if it's easy, who cares? If you're talented, then you can prove it. And that was one of those places where, You had to prove your talent, and you had to prove you could do it.
These guys are pros. And if the conditions are tough, they're tough for everybody. And the cream always rises to the top.
Coming up next.
All that just drives you insane. You need to be fishing, and you can't be.
When I got locked out, I mean, I went back to my room that night and cried.
Fishing so tough on the Ohio River, many of the pros in 1987 were forced to make long runs. The decision for some proved to be costly.
Do you remember that they burned enough gas in that Classic where somebody could have went around the world in a car?
You're talking 100 miles away from the launch area, and yet this is where the fishermen were going.
And the fishermen were just trying to get as far away from the rest of the crowd as they could. And in the case of the Ohio River, it was necessary because some sections of the river were better than others, had bigger fish, probably because there were more backwaters in there.
Even though you have less fishing time, you don't have to share the water as much, so consequently you're better off, I think, giving up an hour's fishing to get to water where a lot of other people aren't going to be.
At that particular tournament, they thought the farther they could get away from Louisville, they'd find better water quality and therefore better fishing.
It's like a big golden carrot, you know, hanging it out there in front of you. Here, just a lock away and several miles away, maybe 80, 90 miles. It's some beautiful, you know, bass water.
Listen, you know, you got a boat, you furnish the gas, and you got this incredible classic boat, and what's a couple hundred miles? I mean, they run 55, 65, 70 miles an hour. And
what happens, of course, on a long run like that is you sacrifice all of your fishing time in the hope that you can get into a tributary that's got better cover, and hopefully in your basically about 2 hours of fishing time, you can catch enough fish.
3 bites in 2 hours, and you done missed half the morning running, and well, that's hard to do.
The painful part was you just knew you were eating your time up. You just wish you could have ran 180 miles an hour instead of 60, you know, you just, man, you got to go. And then when you get up there, the whole time you're thinking, man, I hope I catch that lock open where I can get in there. I hope there's no barges in line to get through that lock. And and then when you get there, there's a barge in front of you and you got to wait. And it's just, all that just drives you insane. You need to be fishing, and you can't be.
Guy Aker made the long run every single day. I think Guy told me that he'd run over 1,200 miles in the week, including all the practice. 1,200 miles in a bass boat, that's just incredible.
And I said, I'm gonna see if I can run 128 miles and get back and see how much time I got to fish. And he said, 128 miles? And I said, yeah. I said, the only thing about it, I said, we're gonna have to probably fuel up at least twice to make that run.
He gambled on the locks. You know, he followed Gary Klein up the river. He had less than 2 hours to fish.
But I figured I had enough bites that first day to win it. Well, I wasn't too disappointed because I was leading.
If Guy would have hit it right, he could have won in those 6 hours. He had more potential in that body of water, but he just didn't have enough time to make it all work.
So I get back down the second day. It's down probably 8 inches. So a lot of my stuff is showing. My grass is I like on the ground, and most of my logs. So I messed around in there and missed one fish and caught one weighed almost 4 pounds. And the time I did this and messed around, it was time to leave. So I didn't catch but one fish that second day.
Through practice, they figured out that was their best shot at catching from 1 to a limit of fish. Even though they were getting up all that time to run, that was their best shot at doing it. And that's what all of us done.
I was real confident when I was going back there that third day that all my water was going to be back in there and all my fish would move back in there. But it was down 6 inches further.
Even though they only had a couple hours to fish during the day, they figured that if they could catch 3 or 4 decent-sized fish, they could do better than somebody who would stay closer to the city. And it almost paid off for them, really.
It was by far, no doubt about it, the place to be fishing because it had the right stuff down there.
That tournament I knew was going to be real tough, and I didn't think it was going to take very much weight at all to win the event. So I sort of formulated my game plan in running a long ways. I was making about a 93-mile one-way run.
You could lock through and run down the river, and you could find some of the right stuff. And Gary Klein did that the first day, and he didn't get back through the lock.
I made one pass through the creek, and I caught him pretty good, and it was, do I leave and come back and try to make sure that I get through the lock? Or do I stay and win it in one day? And I thought, well, you know, I can stay at least another 45 minutes before I make this 90-mile journey back, because we had talked to the lockmaster that morning and we had a designated time. So I stayed the extra 45 minutes and I didn't help myself anymore and made the run back and got locked out of the locks.
The first day, they told us the time to be back. And about the time they closed the gate, well, here come Gary. And he said once he started the gates in, he would not open them back up. He didn't get back. He lost it all.
When you go through those locks, no matter where you are, you're taking that chance. We all know that.
And he took a chance, and it cost him a lot of fish, and it could have cost him the Bassmaster Classic.
It was just one of the parts of the drama. Everybody had the same opportunity to go out and find those fish and then try to catch a limit, and it was tough in Louisville.
He felt like that he, had a real good shot to win that tournament until that happened.
But I really felt that I put myself in the right water, using the right technique to catch these fish. And that's why I really thought that I had a good shot of winning it. And I mean, literally, when I got locked out, I went back to my room that night and cried.
Up next on Bassmaster Classic Yearbook.
I just shut down, and I'd act like I ran out of gas, and everybody would go on.
And then he just stopped. Yeah. Oh, Fly George.
To win the Bassmaster Classic Championship, you have to set yourself apart from the rest of the field. In 1987, the top 5 were separated by only ounces, but their strategies couldn't be further apart.
I'm not sure you've ever had a classic where the strategies were more diametrically opposed than those two, than that 87 classic.
That tournament, Guy Aker ran 120 miles one way before he started fishing. But George Cochran won that event, and George told me later that he didn't use probably 2-3 gallons of gasoline the whole tournament.
Man, he was sneaky. I'm gonna tell you, he pulled a fast one on us because he was fishing right by the boat ramp.
What I did, I'd take off just like everybody, and everybody starts running down the lake. Well, I'd run down with them like a mile, then all of a sudden, I'd just shut down, and I'd act like I ran out of gas, and everybody would go on.
And then he just stopped and fished. Yeah. So Fly George.
That was so cool. Everybody would take off and run, and George would stay right there. And he didn't go anywhere.
The name of the game is to find them and then try to feed them something they like. And that was, see, the genius under pressure, it shines in the dark. And that's exactly what Cochran did. He did that sneak in, and I guess at least 2 days he's doubled back and snuck in there and caught him enough to win the Classic.
George Cochran won the tournament by staying very close, and he'd found a small weed bed with a couple of lay-down logs in it, as I recall, not too very far from the launch area.
It's our last day to practice for the Classic. It was real bad weather, stormy, and my son, David, was like 8 or 9 years old at that time. And my wife said, now you're not going to take that baby out in this bad weather and way off. So I put the boat in right where we're taking off from, and we caught them good. And after I practiced that one day, I made up my mind right then I wasn't going to run.
And so in his mind, it was like, well, I'll just sit here and try. It may not take many fish to win, but I'll sit here and pick out the one so that I can get and spend my time with my line in the water as opposed to, running for a couple hours.
He maximized his fishing time, so one thing he did. A lot of people were running and didn't have fishing time, hardly any fishing time.
And George did not have an easy time with it at all. There weren't a lot of fish there. He just had made up his mind that there were going to be fish there and worked it as long as he could.
But keep in mind, we're not talking about a whole lot of weight here. We're talking about the smallest amount of weight in the Classic history was then, still is, and probably will ever be. So he didn't have to have a whole lot of fish, and I think he knew that. I think he knew that what was in that area would be enough to at least give him a shot at winning the Classic.
George had the good smarts enough to just stay right there and fish and not waste his time running.
This was a victory for the average fisherman who had seen these guys making these runs, and it was, I told you so. You don't have to go that far to win a tournament. You don't have to go that far to catch fish. And sometimes it's better just to drop the trolling motor and start fishing. And again, it shows you how smart George was. He wasn't willing to take those risks, knowing full well that he could at least catch some fish nearby and beat the guys simply through making more casts.
Winning the '87 Classic brought him a lot of things, you know, money, fame, sponsors. But what most folks don't realize is that it gave him the confidence to quit his real job. You know, he had a lot of success juggling his job as a railroad brakeman, but he wanted to fish. His heart was in fishing. It's what he thought about every minute.
When I worked on the railroad, I'd ride the caboose, and I'd sit there and I'd read Bassmasters from front to back. Then the next day I'd go out on a run, I'd read it again, and I'd read it again.
He and his dad had some friction early on in George's career because George would take time off from work to go fish tournaments, and his dad thought that that was folly and thought that, you know, well, fishing, you can't make a living fishing.
He hated me fishing. He tried to get me away from fishing tournaments. He got so mad at me, he said, quit this nonsense. You need to be working on the railroads. Quit this fishing dream you got going, you know.
Well, he had George's life mapped out. George's going to be a businessman like him and work hard and go fishing.
When I would go to a tournament, my wife had to lie to him. My mother had to lie to him about where I was because he would raise so much hell. That year when I went to the Classic, my mother, all my family goes, and my dad wouldn't go at all. And my mother called him after the second day, and she said, if you don't get your plane and be here in Cincinnati and watch your son win this Classic, I'm getting a divorce when I get home. He said, I'll be there. And so he got on a plane and came, and it made me really happy.
That was the first time his dad had come to a tournament. George said it was a surprise and a real delight to see his dad there the last day. And for the first time, his dad understood his passion for the sport, but more importantly, that a man could make a living at this sport.
And he came up to me crying, and he said, I'm so proud of you. He said, I'll never say anything against you fishing ever again. You know, I won my father on his feelings, and after that Classic, everybody was behind me, and it was a big relief with me, especially with my father.
This has been a presentation of ESPN, the worldwide leader in sports.